In the dusty archives of the London Chronicle, dated April 1884, there is a scandal that society tried to bury. It wasn't about murder, and it wasn't about theft. It was about a mistake that cost a family their reputation and gave a lonely duke the one thing his money couldn't buy. Everyone knew the Duke of Crestwood came to London to purchase a wife, specifically the most beautiful woman in England. But history tells a different story. It tells us that while the world looked at the diamond in the spotlight, the Duke was busy falling in love with the girl holding the candle in the dark. This is the true, untold story of how the unwanted sister stole the heart of the most powerful man in the empire. The rain in London did not wash away the grime. It merely made the cobblestones of Mayfair slick and treacherous. Inside the drawing room of number 42 Grosvenor Square, the atmosphere was equally suffocating. It was April 14th, 1884. The Vane family was drowning, and their only life raft was currently standing in front of a gilded mirror, pinching her cheeks to make them bloom. "Higher, Arabella. Lift your chin," Lady Catherine Vane commanded, her voice sharp as the crack of a whip. "The Duke of Crestwood is a man of height. He must not look down upon you and see a double chin." Arabella Vane, 20 years old and widely considered the pearl of the season, sighed. She was undeniably exquisite. Golden hair that seemed to trap the sunlight even on a grey day, and eyes the colour of forget-me-nots. But she was also vacuous, a porcelain doll moulded by a mother terrified of poverty. In the corner of the room, almost blending into the heavy velvet drapes, sat Genevieve. Genevieve Vane was 2 years older than Arabella, but she looked 10 years more tired. She was not the pearl. She was, as her mother often reminded her, the setting, the dull metal required to hold the jewel in place. Her hair was a dark, uninspiring chestnut, pulled back severely to prevent any loose strands from offending the eye. Her dress was grey wool, mended at the cuffs. "Genevieve," Lady Catherine snapped without turning her head. "Have you finished the accounts?" Genevieve didn't look up from the ledger on her lap. "Yes, Mother. We are overdrawn at the butcher's by £4, and the dressmaker is threatening to send the bailiff if the silk for Arabella's ball gown isn't paid for by Tuesday." "Stop!" Lady Catherine hissed, finally turning to glare at her eldest daughter. "Do not speak of money today. Today we are wealthy. Today we are the Vanes of distinct lineage. Sebastian St. Clair is coming. Sebastian St. Clair, the Duke of Crestwood." The name held weight. He was 32, possessed one of the largest estates in Derbyshire, and had a reputation that made mothers shiver with a mix of fear and greed. He was known to be cold, ruthlessly efficient, in Parliament, and utterly bored by the frivolities of the ton. He needed a duchess not for love, but for breeding and hosting. He had sent a letter of intent to call upon Arabella Vane specifically. "He will be here in 10 minutes, Arabella whimpered, smoothing her silk skirts. "What if he asks me about politics, or history?" "Then you smile," Genevieve said softly from her corner. She closed the ledger and stood up. "You smile, you offer him tea, and you agree with whatever he says. If he asks your opinion, say you find the subject too dreary for such a lovely afternoon." "Excellent advice," Lady Catherine said, dismissing Genevieve with a wave of her hand. "Now, go to the library. If the Duke sees you, he might think we cannot afford a proper maid and are using family members for labour. Stay out of sight until he leaves." It was a dismissal Genevieve was used to. She was the mistake, the daughter who wasn't beautiful enough to marry well, nor charming enough to be a companion. She was the invisible machinery that kept the Vane household running. She managed the servants, cooked the books to hide their debt, and wrote Arabella's correspondence. Genevieve picked up her ledger and walked toward the door. As she passed Arabella, she paused. "His Grace studied at Oxford," she whispered. "He prefers classical music to opera, and he hates the smell of lavender. Don't sit too close to the arrangement on the table." Arabella blinked, confused, but Genevieve was already gone, slipping into the shadows of the hallway, just as the heavy brass knocker on the front door slammed against the wood. The Duke had arrived. Genevieve didn't go to her room. She went to the library, a dusty, freezing room that the family rarely used. It was her sanctuary. The walls were lined with books her father, the late Baron Vane, had collected before gambling away their fortune. She sat at the heavy oak desk, shivering slightly, and opened the ledger again. But she couldn't focus on the numbers. Through the thin walls, she could hear the muffled baritone of a man's voice in the drawing room. It was deep, resonant, and devoid of the high-pitched affectations of most London dandies. She imagined him. Sebastian St. Clair. She had read his speeches in the papers. He argued for agrarian reform and tenant rights, arguments that were logical, fierce, and surprisingly compassionate. It was hard to reconcile the man who wrote those passionate speeches with the man currently inspecting her sister like a prize mare. "He will choose her," Genevieve whispered to the empty room. "Men always choose the light. They never think to look at what casts the shadow." The courtship was swift, precise, and agonizingly dull. For 2 weeks, the Duke of Crestwood called upon Arabella Vane. He took her for rides in Hyde Park in his black carriage. He escorted her to the opera. He sent flowers, white roses, stiff and formal. And every evening, Arabella would return to the house in tears. "He is made of stone," Arabella cried one evening, throwing her bonnet onto the chaise. "He asked me today what I thought of the tension in the Sudan. The Sudan. I told him I thought the fabric was lovely, and he looked at me as if I were a simpleton." Genevieve, who was mending the hem of Arabella's walking dress, hid a smile. "Arabella, the Sudan is a place in Africa. There is a war there." "Well, how was I to know?" Arabella sobbed. "He scares me, Ginny. He stares at me with those icy grey eyes, waiting for me to say something clever. I have nothing clever to say. I just want his title and his money, so we don't have to live in this draughty house." Lady Catherine paced the floor. "You must try harder. We have the invitation to the Amberson ball. It is rumoured he will propose there. You must captivate him, Arabella. Memorize a poem. Something intellectual." Genevieve sighed. "I will write something out for you. You can learn it by rote." The night of the Amberson ball arrived. It was the pinnacle of the season. The ballroom was a swirling galaxy of silk, diamonds, and candlelight. Genevieve was in attendance, though only barely. As a poor relation, she was dressed in a remade gown of dark navy, seated behind the potted palms near the chaperones. Her job was to hold Arabella's fan and smelling salts should the corset prove too tight. She watched from afar as Sebastian St. Clair danced with Arabella. He was taller than she imagined, broad-shouldered and imposing in his black evening wear. His face was handsome but severe, with a jawline that looked carved from granite. He moved with a predatory grace, but Genevieve noticed the tightness around his eyes. He was bored. Midway through the evening, Arabella was swept away by a young viscount, and the Duke, seizing the opportunity for escape, slipped away from the dance floor. Genevieve watched him go. He didn't head for the smoking room where the men gathered to gamble. He headed toward the terrace doors, but finding them crowded, he turned down the corridor, leading to the private library of Lord Amberson. Genevieve hesitated. She should stay put, but the air in the ballroom was stifling, and the sight of Arabella flirting badly with the Viscount was giving her a headache. She waited a moment, then followed the Duke's path, intending to find a quiet alcove to rest. She found the library door ajar. Inside, the room was dim, lit only by the dying embers of a fire. She thought it was empty. She stepped inside, exhaling a long breath, and walked over to the massive globe standing near the window. She spun it gently, her finger tracing the line of the equator. "If you are looking for the Sudan," a deep voice rumbled from the shadows of a wingback chair, "it is a bit higher and to the right." Genevieve jumped, her hand flying to her chest. Sebastian St. Clair rose from the chair. In the low light, he looked even more intimidating. He held a glass of brandy in one hand and a book in the other. "Your Grace," she stammered, dropping into a clumsy curtsy. "I apologize. I thought the room was unoccupied." It was occupied by a man seeking refuge from the insipid noise of violins and matchmaking mothers, Sebastian said, stepping into the firelight. He looked at her, really looked at her. Genevieve knew what he saw, a plain girl in an outdated dress with ink stains on her fingers. A nobody. "I will leave you in peace," she said, turning to the door. "Wait," he commanded. It wasn't a shout, but the authority in his voice stopped her cold. "You spun the globe. You knew where your hand landed, the Ivory Coast." Genevieve turned back, lifting her chin slightly. "I have read about the trade routes, the export of cocoa and timber." Sebastian raised an eyebrow. "Indeed? And what is your opinion on the French expansion into that region?" It was a test. He was mocking her, surely. He expected her to titter and say something about the lovely fabrics. A spark of defiance lit up in Genevieve's chest. She was invisible anyway. What did it matter what she said? "I think," she said, her voice steadying, "that the French are overextending themselves. However, their investment in infrastructure puts the British efforts to shame. If we do not modernize our ports in the West, we will lose the trade war before a single shot is fired." Silence stretched between them. The clock on the mantel ticked loudly. Sebastian lowered his glass. The look of boredom was gone, replaced by a sharp, piercing intensity. "A bold assertion," he said softly, "and entirely correct." He took a step closer. "Who are you?" Genevieve's heart hammered against her ribs. If she told him she was Arabella's sister, the plain one, he would dismiss her. Or worse, he would tell Lady Catherine she had been opinionated and rude, and her mother would lock her in the attic. "I am nobody, Your Grace," she said. "Just a wallflower seeking quiet." "Nobody reads trade reports on the Ivory Coast," Sebastian countered. He glanced at her hands. "Ink stains. You write?" I copy letters. For my employer." "A governess?" he guessed. Genevieve hesitated. It was close enough to the truth. "Something like that." Sebastian placed his book on the table. It was a copy of The Republic by Plato. "Do you know this text?" he asked. "Thrasymachus believes justice is nothing but the advantage of the stronger," Genevieve quoted from memory. "But Socrates argues that justice is a virtue of the soul." Sebastian's eyes widened. For the first time all evening, a genuine smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, making him look 10 years younger. "And who do you agree with, my mystery governess?" "Thrasymachus is more practical," Genevieve admitted, stepping closer to the fire. "But one must hope Socrates is right. Otherwise the world is a very dark place for those of us who are not the stronger." They talked for 20 minutes. They argued about philosophy, laughed about the absurdity of the ostrich feather trend in the ballroom, and debated the merits of steam power versus coal. For 20 minutes, Genevieve was not the ugly sister. She was a mind. She was a soul on fire. Suddenly, the heavy doors of the library creaked open. The sound of a waltz drifted in. "Duke Crestwood," a voice called out. It was Lord Amberson. Genevieve panicked. She couldn't be found here alone with the Duke. It would be a scandal. "I must go," she whispered. "Wait," Sebastian said, reaching for her hand. "I don't even know your name." "It is better that way," she said. She pulled her hand away, but not before he felt the rough callus on her middle finger, the mark of a writer. She slipped out through the servants' door, hidden in the panelling, just as Lord Amberson entered the main entrance. Sebastian stood alone in the library, his hand still tingling where he had touched hers. He looked at the empty space where she had stood. The air still smelled faintly of old books and lemon soap. Finally, he murmured to himself, someone real. He returned to the ballroom, his eyes scanning the crowd. But the woman in navy was gone. Instead, he saw Lady Catherine Vane towing Arabella toward him. "Your Grace," Lady Catherine beamed. "Arabella has been looking for you everywhere. She was just telling me how much she hopes you will join us for tea tomorrow." Sebastian looked at Arabella. She was undeniably beautiful, perfect features, perfect skin. But he looked into her eyes and saw nothing. A vacuum. Then he remembered the fire in the eyes of the woman in the library. "I would be delighted," Sebastian said, a plan forming in his mind. "In fact, I find myself quite eager to visit Grosvenor Square again." He wasn't coming for the pearl. He was coming to hunt the ghost. The following morning, a liveried footman arrived at number 42 Grosvenor Square. He did not carry the expected bouquet of white roses. Instead, he carried a small, heavy parcel wrapped in brown paper. Arabella squealed with delight, ripping the paper open. Her face fell instantly. "A book?" she exclaimed, holding it up as if it were a dead rodent. "He sent me a book?" Lady Catherine snatched it from her daughter's hands. "It is a first edition of The Wealth of Nations. And look, there is a note." She pulled a thick cream card from the cover. It says, "To Miss Vane. A contemplation on our discussion regarding trade. I eagerly await your thoughts on Chapter 4. Lady Catherine stared at Arabella. "What discussion regarding trade?" "I didn't discuss trade," Arabella wailed, throwing herself onto the sofa. "I told you. I talked to Lord Pembroke about his spaniels, and then I danced with the Viscount. I never spoke a word to the Duke about trade." In the corner, Genevieve froze. The blood drained from her face. He knew. The Duke was not courting Arabella because of her beauty. He was courting the woman he met in the library, but he assumed the woman in the library was Arabella, simply showing a different side of herself. Or perhaps he was testing them. "Genevieve!" Lady Catherine barked. "Fix this. Read the chapter. Write a response. Make it witty but submissive. We cannot lose him now. The butcher refused to send the lamb chops this morning until I paid 2 sovereigns. "Mother," Genevieve said quietly, "this is dangerous. If the Duke finds out Arabella did not write the letters—" "He will not find out," Lady Catherine snapped. "Arabella has the face of an angel. Men believe what they see. If she hands him a letter, he will assume it came from her mind. Now get to work." And so the deception began. For 3 weeks, a romance bloomed in ink. Sebastian would send a letter, sometimes a poem, sometimes a complex political riddle, and Genevieve would stay up until dawn, her candle burning low, crafting the response. She poured her soul into those letters. She wrote about her dreams of traveling to Italy, her frustration with the constraints placed on women, her love for the smell of rain on hot pavement. She was falling in love with a man she could never have, using her sister's name as a shield. Sebastian, for his part, was captivated. The Arabella he met in person was shy, reserved, and often vaporous, responding to his questions with rehearsed monosyllables. But the Arabella in the letters? She was fiery, intelligent, and deeply passionate. He convinced himself that she was simply nervous in person. He told himself that the true Arabella was the one on the page. But Sebastian St. Clair was not a fool. He was a man who hunted inconsistencies for a living in the House of Lords. On a Tuesday afternoon, he came to tea. The drawing room was tense. Lady Catherine hovered like a hawk, and Arabella sat stiffly in her blue silk, terrified of opening her mouth. Genevieve was there, too, serving the tea. She wore her grey wool dress, her hair pulled back so tight it hurt. She kept her eyes on the floor, terrified that if she looked at him, he would see the truth burning in her gaze. "Miss Vane," Sebastian said, taking the cup from Genevieve's hand without looking at her. He focused entirely on Arabella. "I was fascinated by your letter regarding the architecture of Florence. You mentioned that the Duomo was your favourite symbol of defiant ambition." Arabella blinked. "Did I?" Lady Catherine coughed loudly. "Arabella has such a poetic soul, Your Grace. Sometimes she forgets her own brilliance." Sebastian didn't. "Look at the mother." He leaned forward, his grey eyes locking onto Arabella. "And what did you think of the quote I included?" "From Dante?" Arabella's lip quivered. She looked at Genevieve in panic. Genevieve stepped forward to offer the sugar bowl, trying to save her sister. "Perhaps Miss Vane is tired, Your Grace. The heat today is oppressive." Sebastian turned his head slowly. For the first time, he looked directly at Genevieve. "I do not believe I asked the maid for her opinion," he said. His voice was cold, dismissive. Genevieve flinched as if slapped. "I am not the maid, Your Grace. I am Genevieve, Arabella's sister." Sebastian paused. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. "I was not aware there was another sister." "Genevieve is the quiet one," Lady Catherine interjected quickly, a nervous laugh bubbling up. "She prefers the domestic sphere. She is simple in her tastes." Sebastian studied Genevieve. He looked at her plain dress, her ink-stained fingers, her weary eyes. He saw nothing of the fire from the library. He saw nothing of the woman from the letters. "I see," Sebastian said, turning his back on her. "My apologies, Miss Genevieve. Please, fetch more hot water." Genevieve turned and walked out of the room, her heart shattering into dust. He didn't recognize her. He didn't see her. To him, she was just furniture. But as she left, she didn't see the way Sebastian watched her reflection in the mirror. He had noticed something. He had noticed that when he quoted Dante, Arabella looked confused. But Genevieve's lips had moved. She had silently mouthed the next line of the poem. "Abandon all hope, ye who enter here." Sebastian narrowed his eyes. The game was afoot. The climax of the London season was the Grand Masquerade Ball, hosted by the Duchess of Devonshire. It was the perfect setting for secrets, and the inevitable place for them to be exposed. The Vane family was in attendance. Arabella was dressed as a shepherdess, in billowing white silk and diamonds purchased on credit. Lady Catherine was a queen. And Genevieve? Genevieve was not supposed to attend. But at the last minute, Lady Catherine decided they needed a chaperone to ensure Arabella didn't run off with the penniless Viscount again. Genevieve was forced into a black domino cloak and a simple black mask. She was the shadow, meant to blend into the darkness. The ballroom was suffocatingly hot. The music swirled, a dizzying waltz that made the floor vibrate. Genevieve stood by a marble pillar, watching Sebastian dance with Arabella. He looked magnificent as a Venetian doge, his face obscured by a silver mask, but his height and bearing were unmistakable. He held Arabella close, but they weren't talking. Suddenly, Sebastian stopped. He bowed to Arabella, whispered something in her ear, and walked away, leaving her on the dance floor. He walked straight toward the terrace doors. Genevieve watched him go. A strange pull, like a magnetic force, tugged at her. She knew she shouldn't follow. She knew it was madness. But she couldn't help herself. She slipped through the crowd and out into the cool night air. The terrace was empty, save for a few couples kissing in the shadows. Genevieve walked to the stone balustrade, looking out over the dark gardens. She took off her mask, letting the cool breeze hit her flushed face. "The shepherdess does not know the difference between Dante and Petrarch," a voice said from the darkness. Genevieve spun around. Sebastian was leaning against a stone urn, his silver mask in his hand. His face was unreadable in the moonlight. "Your Grace," Genevieve breathed. I should find my sister." "Stop," Sebastian said. He didn't move, but his voice was like a physical barrier. "I asked her tonight about the letter she sent yesterday, the one about the ethics of truth." Genevieve's breath hitched. That had been her favorite letter. She had written it with tears in her eyes, confessing that truth was often a luxury the poor could not afford. "She thought I was talking about a dress," Sebastian said, his voice hard. "She giggled and said truth was very fashionable." He pushed off the urn and walked toward Genevieve. "I am tired of games, Miss Genevieve. I am a man who values efficiency. I have spent 3 weeks courting a ghost. I want to know who is haunting me." He stopped 2 feet from her. "Show me your hands." "What?" "Your hands. Show them to me." Trembling, Genevieve raised her hands. Sebastian took her right hand. He turned it over, running his thumb over her middle finger. He found the callus, the hard ridge of skin formed by hours of holding a pen. He looked up, his eyes blazing. "It was you." Genevieve tried to pull away, but he held her fast. "I don't know what you mean. Do not lie to me." Sebastian's voice rose, a crack of thunder in the quiet garden. "The library, the letters, the mind that has kept me awake for 20 nights. It was you. It was always you." "I did it for my family," Genevieve cried, the dam finally breaking. "We are ruined, Your Grace. We have nothing. My father gambled away our fortune. Arabella is our only hope. If she doesn't marry well, we will be on the streets. I wrote the letters to make you love her." "You wrote the letters to make me love her?" Sebastian laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "You foolish girl. You wrote the letters to make me love you." The silence that followed was deafening. Genevieve stared at him, her mouth slightly open. "No, that is impossible. Look at me. I am the plain one, the invisible one." "You are the only thing in that house that is real," Sebastian said intensely. He gripped her shoulders. "Do you think I care about the shape of a nose or the color of hair? I am the Duke of Crestwood. I can buy beauty. I can buy obedience. But I cannot buy a soul that challenges mine. I cannot buy a woman who understands the Republic." He looked down at her, and for a moment, Genevieve thought he was going to kiss her. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "I fell in love with a mind," Sebastian whispered. "I thought it belonged to Arabella. I feel deceived." He let go of her abruptly, stepping back. The tenderness vanished, replaced by a cold fury. "You played me for a fool, Genevieve Vane. You and your mother. You presented a false bill of goods." "I never meant to hurt you," Genevieve wept. "I only wanted to save my sister." "And in doing so, you have condemned us all," Sebastian said. "I cannot marry Arabella. I cannot marry a woman I do not respect, and I cannot marry you." Genevieve felt a cold hand grip her heart. "Why?" "Because you are a liar," Sebastian said, his voice flat. "And because society would destroy us. Imagine the scandal. The Duke rejects the pearl for the spinster sister. They would say I was bewitched. They would say you tricked me, and they would be right." He put his mask back on, hiding his face once more. "The courtship is over, Miss Vane. Tell your mother I will not be calling again. I will leave for Derbyshire in the morning." He turned and walked away, his cape swirling around him, disappearing into the ballroom. Genevieve stood alone on the terrace, the moonlight illuminating the tears streaming down her face. She had won his heart, only to lose him to her own deception. But as she stood there, a figure emerged from the shadows of the hedges nearby. A short, stout man with a notebook. It was Mr. Silas Finch, the most notorious gossip columnist in London. He had heard every word. "Oh, this is delicious," Finch muttered to himself, scribbling furiously. "The Duke, the spinster, and the fraud. London will burn for this." Genevieve didn't see him. She only saw the empty door where Sebastian had gone. The unravelling was complete. The ruin she had tried so hard to prevent was coming, and it was going to be far worse than bankruptcy. The morning sun hit London with a cheerful brilliance that felt like a mockery to the residents of number 42 Grosvenor Square. It began with a scream. Genevieve was in the kitchen, scraping mould off a block of cheese, when she heard her mother's shriek echo from the breakfast room. It was not a sound of annoyance. It was the sound of a woman watching her life burn to the ground. Genevieve dropped the knife and ran upstairs. She found Lady Catherine clutching the morning edition of the Tatler, her face a mask of purple rage. Arabella was already sobbing into her napkin. "You!" Lady Catherine screeched, pointing a trembling finger at Genevieve. "You have destroyed us, you spiteful, jealous little wretch." She threw the paper at Genevieve. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up. The headline was bold, black, and damning. "The Duke and the Dupe. How a Plain Jane Tricked a Peer by Silas Finch." Genevieve felt the blood drain from her legs. She sank to her knees and read the opening paragraph. London society has long admired the beauty of Miss Arabella Vane, the so-called pearl of the season. But it seems the pearl is nothing but a hollow shell. Sources confirm that the Duke of Crestwood, the Empire's most eligible bachelor, was not courting the beauty, but the brains of her spinster sister, Genevieve. Through a deceitful campaign of forged letters and stolen words, the plain Miss Vane tricked the Duke into falling for a phantom. But the game is up. The Duke has fled, and the Vanes are left with nothing but their lies. It was brutal, it was exaggerated, and it was devastating. "We are ruined," Arabella wailed, lifting her tear-streaked face. "Lord Pembroke sent a note cancelling our walk. The invitation to the Royal Garden Party has been rescinded. No one will marry me now. I am the laughingstock of London." "Get out!" Lady Catherine hissed, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. "Get out of my sight, Genevieve. Go to the attic. You are not to be seen. You are not to eat. You are a stain on this family." Genevieve didn't argue. There was no point. She stood up, her legs shaking, and walked out of the room. As she climbed the stairs to the servants' quarters, she heard the front door knocker banging incessantly. It wasn't guests. It was the creditors. By noon, the house was under siege. The news of the scandal had spooked every merchant in Mayfair. The butcher, the dressmaker, the wine merchant. They all wanted their money now. From her window in the attic, Genevieve watched as two burly men carried out the pianoforte, then the velvet chaise, then the silver candelabras. The house was being stripped. The illusion of wealth they had maintained for so long was being dismantled piece by piece. Genevieve sat on her narrow cot, staring at the wall. She didn't cry. She felt a strange, numb calm. The worst had happened. The secret was out. There was nothing left to fear. She thought of Sebastian. He was likely halfway to Derbyshire by now, speeding away from the wreckage she had caused. He probably hated her. He read the paper and laughed, or perhaps he felt vindicated. Thrasymachus was right, she thought bitterly. Justice is the advantage of the stronger, and I was never strong enough. Downstairs the noise of the looting ceased. A heavy silence fell over the house. Then heavy footsteps on the stairs. Not the scurrying of the maid, but the deliberate, heavy tread of a man. Genevieve's heart stopped. Had the bailiff come to arrest her for fraud? The door to the attic creaked open. Genevieve stood, up, backing against the wall, bracing herself for the constable. But it was not a constable. Framed in the doorway, blocking out the light, was Sebastian St. Clair. He looked like a thunderstorm that had taken human form. He was still wearing his travelling clothes, a heavy greatcoat and riding boots splashed with mud. He held a riding crop in one hand and a crumpled copy of the Tatler in the other. Genevieve couldn't breathe. "Your Grace?" Sebastian didn't speak. He stepped into the tiny, dusty room. He looked around at the peeling wallpaper, the single cot, the cracked wash basin. His jaw tightened until a muscle jumped in his cheek. "This is where you live?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "It is sufficient," Genevieve whispered. "Why are you here? I thought you left." "I was at the station," Sebastian said. He threw the newspaper onto the cot. "I read this." He took a step closer, crowding her in the small space. "Do you know what they are calling you? A witch, a siren, a fraud." "They are right," Genevieve said, looking down. "I deceived you." "Yes, you did," Sebastian agreed harshly. "But this article, it paints you as a villain. It says you did it out of malice, out of jealousy." "Does it matter?" Genevieve asked. "The result is the same." "It matters to me," Sebastian roared. The sound filled the small room, making Genevieve flinch. He paced the small floor, 3 steps one way, 3 steps back. "I sat on the train, Genevieve. I watched the city fade away. And I realized something. I was angry at you, yes. My pride was wounded. But when I read those words, when I saw how easily the world turned on you, how they enjoyed tearing you apart." He stopped and looked at her. The anger in his eyes had shifted. It wasn't directed at her anymore. It was a protective, possessive fire. "You are the smartest woman I have ever met," Sebastian said, "and you are living in a cupboard while your foolish sister and cruel mother weep over furniture downstairs." "They are my family," Genevieve defended weakly. "They are parasites," Sebastian corrected. "I saw the bailiffs. I paid them off." Genevieve's eyes widened. You what?" "I paid them. All of them. The butcher, the baker, the damn dressmaker. The debt is cleared." Genevieve felt dizzy. "Why? That is thousands of pounds. Why would you do that after what I did?" Sebastian closed the distance between them. He reached out and took her chin in his hand, forcing her to look at him. "Because I am a selfish man, Genevieve. I told you, I want a mind that challenges mine. I cannot have that if you are in a debtor's prison or starving in an attic." He took a deep breath. "I have a proposition. An ultimatum." "I have nothing to give you," Genevieve said. "You have yourself," Sebastian said. "I am going to marry you, Genevieve." Genevieve gasped. She pulled back, shaking her head. "No, you can't. The scandal. They will destroy you. A duke marrying the disgraced spinster? You will be a pariah." "Let them talk," Sebastian said with a sneer. "I am the Duke of Crestwood. I am richer than God and twice as powerful. If I choose to marry the woman who bested me in a battle of wits, that is my prerogative. But," he held up a finger, "there are conditions." Genevieve waited, her heart pounding. "First," Sebastian said, "we leave London. Tonight, we go to Derbyshire. I will not have my wife subjected to the whispers of these vipers. And second?" "Second," Sebastian's expression hardened. "Your family stays here." Genevieve froze. "What?" "I have paid their debts," Sebastian said. "They have the house. They have a clean slate. But I will not support them further, and you will not write to them. You will not send them money. You are choosing me, Genevieve. You are choosing a life of the mind, a life of truth. You cannot take the lies of this house with you." It was a cruel choice. Her mother and sister were vain and foolish, but they were the only world she had ever known. To leave them was to sever the root of her existence. "They cannot survive without me," Genevieve whispered. "Arabella doesn't know how to boil an egg." "Then she will learn," Sebastian said. "Or she will find a husband who will tolerate her vacuousness. That is not your burden anymore." He held out his hand. His palm was broad, calloused from riding. It was an invitation to a new life, a terrifying, exhilarating life. "Choose, Genevieve," Sebastian said softly. "The shadows, or the flame." Genevieve looked at his hand. She looked at the dusty attic where she had spent 22 years hiding. She thought of the letters she had written. Letters about freedom, about passion, about the Ivory Coast and the stars. Those letters were not lies. They were her soul. And this man, this formidable, terrifying, wonderful man, had read them and loved them. Slowly, deliberately, Genevieve reached out. She placed her ink-stained hand into his. "I choose the flame," she whispered. Sebastian's fingers closed around hers, tight and secure. He didn't smile, but the look in his eyes was enough to burn the world down. "Good," he said. "Pack your books. We leave in 10 minutes." The journey north was a severance, a physical cutting of the ties that bound them to the suffocating propriety of London. For 3 days, the carriage rattled over roads that turned from the smooth cobblestones of the capital to the rutted, muddy tracks of the countryside. Inside the velvet-lined cabin, a companionable silence reigned, though it was thick with unspoken thoughts. They had stopped briefly in a grey, wind-swept parish just outside of Nottingham. There were no pealing bells, no choir of angelic boys, and certainly no audience of envious peers. The church was damp, smelling of old stone and beeswax. A nervous vicar, his hands trembling as he held the special license procured by the Duke's formidable solicitors, performed the ceremony in a hurried whisper. Genevieve wore the same grey woolen travelling suit she had fled London in. There was no white silk, no orange blossoms. When the moment came, Sebastian took her hand, his grip firm, warm and anchoring. He slid the heavy gold band onto her finger. It felt weighty, a shackle and a promise all at once. He did not vow to worship her, nor did he promise to obey. Instead, he looked her dead in the eye, his grey gaze piercing through her insecurity, and whispered a vow that wasn't in the prayer book. "I promise never to bore you." It was, Genevieve realized with a start, the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her. By the time the carriage crested the final ridge into Derbyshire, the landscape had shifted into something wild and untamed. Crestwood Manor did not welcome guests, it challenged them. It was a fortress of dark, hewn stone, rising from the bleak expanse of the moors like a jagged tooth of the earth itself. The wind howled around its turrets, a constant, mournful song, and the sky above was a bruising purple, heavy with rain. "It is severe," Sebastian remarked, watching her reflection in the carriage window, bracing himself for her disappointment. "Most find it terrifying. My mother hated it." Genevieve pressed her gloved hand against the cold glass, watching the heather bow before the gale. "It looks resilient," she murmured. "It looks like it doesn't care what the world thinks of it. It simply exists on its own terms." Sebastian smiled then, a rare, genuine expression that softened the harsh lines of his face. "Then you are home, Duchess?" However, entering the house as its mistress was a battle of a different sort. The staff at Crestwood were loyal to the ancient St. Clair line, a hierarchy carved in stone. They had expected a glittering socialite, a pearl to brighten the gloomy halls. Instead, the master had brought home a quiet, mouse-like woman with ink-stained fingers who knew the current price of lamp oil and insisted on carrying her own books. Mrs. Halloway, the housekeeper, was a woman made of iron and starch, and she became the first obstacle. "Your Grace," Mrs. Halloway intoned stiffly one morning, standing like a sentry in the doorway of the morning room. "The menu for the dinner with the bishop has been set. We shall serve the roast pheasant in a heavy port reduction, followed by the sweat pudding." Genevieve did not look up from the ledger she was correcting. "The bishop has gout, Mrs. Halloway. Rich game and heavy sweat will only aggravate his condition and put him in a foul mood for the duration of his stay. We will serve the poached salmon with dill and a vegetable consommé." Mrs. Halloway bristled, her keys jingling at her waist. "But, Your Grace, the pheasant is traditional. The late Duchess always insisted on game for high clergy. It is the Crestwood way." Genevieve stopped writing. The silence stretched, tense, and brittle. She closed the ledger with a deliberate, soft snap. When she stood up, she was small, but she summoned every ounce of the dignity she had learned from reading about queens and warriors. "The late Duchess is not here," Genevieve said, her voice calm but ringing with steel. "I am, and I do not wish to poison the bishop. Salmon, Mrs. Halloway, and please have the library fire lit early. The Duke and I will be working late." Mrs. Halloway stared at her, searching for weakness. She found none. Slowly the older woman curtsied, lower and more respectful than she ever had before. "As you wish, Your Grace." Genevieve had conquered the house, but conquering the man was a far more delicate matter. For the first month, they lived in a strange, suspended state of intellectual intimacy and emotional distance. They were like colleagues working on a great project. They spent their evenings in the vast, shadow-filled library, sitting in opposing wing-back chairs. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the scratching of pens. Sebastian worked on his parliamentary bills regarding tenant rights. Genevieve edited his speeches, sharpening his arguments, and managed the estate ledgers with ruthless efficiency. It was exactly the partnership Sebastian had claimed he wanted. But as the weeks bled into November, a hollow ache began to expand in Genevieve's chest. She had the flame of his mind, yes, but she found herself craving the warmth of his heart. She wanted him to look at her not just as an equal, but as a wife. The tension finally broke on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The library was dim, the rain lashing against the high Gothic windows. Genevieve was standing on a rolling ladder, stretching onto her tiptoes to reach a dusty, leather-bound volume of Aristotle on the highest shelf. She overreached. The ladder wobbled precariously on the uneven floorboards. "Careful!" A deep voice rumbled from directly below her. Genevieve froze. She hadn't heard him approach. Sebastian was standing at the base of the ladder, looking up. Instinctively, he reached out, his large hands gripping her waist to steady the ladder and her. His palms were warm, the heat searing through the fabric of her dress. Genevieve looked down. He was so close. The air in the room suddenly felt thin, charged with electricity. "I can reach it," she said, though her voice was breathless and unconvincing. "I know you can," Sebastian said softly. He didn't let go. "You can do anything, Genevieve. You run this estate better than I ever did. You argue with the vicar about theology, and you win. You have charmed the tenants." His thumbs brushed against her ribs, a touch that sent a shiver down her spine. "But there is one thing you have not done. You have not stopped calling me Your Grace." Genevieve swallowed hard, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "It is proper." "I do not want proper," Sebastian growled, a flash of frustration crossing his eyes. He pulled her down from the ladder. It wasn't rough, but it was decisive. She slid into his arms, her feet hitting the floor, her body pressed flush against his. The smell of him, rain, old paper, and sandalwood, overwhelmed her. "I want the woman who wrote me the letters," he whispered fiercely, his forehead resting against hers. "I want the woman who told me that passion is the only thing worth dying for. Where is she, Genevieve? Why is she hiding from me?" She is afraid, Genevieve admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Afraid of what? Afraid that if you look too closely, without the letters, without the distance, you will realize you made a mistake, that you married the shadow instead of the light. Sebastian let out a ragged breath, as if she had struck him. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. You are not the shadow, Genevieve. You are the sun, he said, his voice raw with emotion. You are the only thing that has ever made this cold, empty tomb of a house feel alive. I don't want the pearl. I never did. I want you. He kissed her then. It wasn't the chaste, polite peck of a convenient marriage. It was a kiss of hunger, a collision of months of repressed longing and solitary desire. It was deep and claiming, a physical seal on the intellectual bond they had already forged. In that kiss, the last of the deception melted away. There were no more secrets, no more ghosts of the past. Just a man and a woman, standing in the center of a storm, holding on to each other as if they were the only two people on earth. 6 months later, spring had finally come to the moors, painting the purple hills with strokes of green. A letter arrived from London, addressed in a loopy familiar scrawl to Her Grace, the Duchess of Crestwood. Genevieve sat in the morning room, the sunlight streaming across the breakfast table, illuminating the silver service. Sebastian was opposite her, reading the Times, his boots resting comfortably near the fire. "From your mother?" he asked, not looking up, though his tone was guarded. "From Arabella," Genevieve said. She broke the wax seal, her hand steady. "Dearest Ginny, I hope this finds you well. Mother is still furious, of course. She refuses to speak your name and tells everyone you have been exiled to the hinterlands. But I thought you should know. I am married. His name is Mr. Arthur Pendleton. He is a solicitor. He is not a duke. He is short, and he has a terrible laugh that sounds like a goose, and he likes to talk about tort law for hours. But Ginny, he thinks I am funny. Not clever, perhaps. I will never be clever like you. But he thinks I am funny. He bought me a puppy. We live in a small house in Kensington. We have no servants, just a cook who comes in twice a week. I burnt the toast yesterday. I am happy. Truly happy. Thank you for leaving. If you hadn't, I would have spent my life trying to be something I am not, just to please Mother. I hope you are loved. Your sister, Arabella." Genevieve lowered the letter. A single tear traced a warm path down her cheek. "Bad news?" Sebastian asked, lowering his paper immediately, his eyes sharp with concern. "No," Genevieve smiled, wiping the tear away with her thumb. "Good news. Arabella burnt the toast." Sebastian chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "A tragedy for the bread, I'm sure." "No," Genevieve said, looking out the window at the wild, beautiful expanse of her home. "A triumph for the baker." She stood up and walked over to her husband. She placed a hand on his shoulder, and he covered it with his own, turning to kiss her palm with a reverence that still took her breath away. They had built a life out of the wreckage of a scandal. They had defied the ton, their families, and the expectations of the world. History would remember the scandal of 1884. The papers would archive the gossip of the Duke and the plain Jane. But the truth was written in the quiet moments at Crestwood Manor. The truth was in the laughter that finally echoed in the halls, in the ink stains on the Duchess's fingers, and in the way the Duke looked at his wife. Not as a prize he had purchased, but as a mystery he was delighted to spend the rest of his life solving. The pearl was forgotten. But the maiden from the shadows? She had become a legend. And so, Genevieve Vane proved that the most powerful beauty isn't the one you see in a mirror. It's the one you find in the mind and the heart. In a world that told her she was nothing, she dared to be everything. She didn't just get the Duke. She got the one thing her sister and mother never understood. She got to be herself. This story reminds us that while society might value the glitter, true love always hunts for the gold hidden in the rock. We all have a little bit of Genevieve in us, hiding in the background, waiting for someone to notice the fire inside. Maybe it's time you stopped hiding yours. If you loved this story of justice, romance, and the triumph of the underdog, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a tale. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their worth today. I'll see you in the next story.